Hello and welcome to the Nano Film Improv podcast. I'm Dave Heron. This podcast is about my trials and tribulations associated with improv comedy and doing it, performing it, rehearsing it. So this is really a cathartic outpouring of the things that I've learned, the things that I'm struggling with, and an opportunity to share with you and hear from you also some of the things that have worked for you, and equally there'll be some things on this podcast that you have tried that don't work for you. It's all very subjective. My experience level is, well, I've had a few years experience doing improv. I've taught a bit of improv. I've performed with a whole range of exciting and talented improvisers and learnt from sets that have gone well and sets that haven't gone well. And this is all part of an evolution for me as well. So you're very welcome in joining me on this podcast. Touching you, touching me. Not now, Justin. I've got boundaries. This podcast is all about touching people in improv scenes. So this is something I didn't think about before I was doing improv, and doing improv has made me aware of people's boundaries. And actually, there's been some wider benefits beyond improv that I'll talk about a little bit later on. And I think before I did improv, I was probably quite dismissive in a quite ignorant way around people's boundaries. I projected my own boundaries onto other people and probably couldn't understand why they didn't adhere to the same values and boundaries that I had. But doing improv has, without shadow of a doubt, improved and revised my own social awareness. And I think about it beyond improv into ordinary life. I remember after COVID, when we all came back out of lockdown, my local church used to do a peace be with you shake of the hands during the service. But after COVID, this was amended to just be a nod or a wave rather than shaking hands and making contact. I also have a friend of mine who, ever since COVID, is now not able to shake people's hands. He instead continues to do the elbow. If you can recall, we all did that during lockdown in the UK. Instead of shaking hands or high-fiving, we used an elbow. We used to sort of make contact with the elbow. And that person, that friend of mine, still does that to this day. So thinking about touching and knowing about people's boundaries in improv has, without doubt, as I say, improved my awareness of other people's own boundaries. And that's been for the better in my workplace and in my life. It's allowed me to be more respectful to others. It's allowed me to sort of increase my wider awareness of what other people find important and acknowledge that. So since I've been doing improv, and certainly since I've been teaching improv, I've thought a lot about people's boundaries with respect to touching in improv scenes. And the way that I've thought about it is probably threefold. And I think it depends on the group of improvisers that you're performing with. So when I'm facilitating an improv class, particularly when it's beginners, I pretty much have a blanket boundary of no touching at all. None of the scenes or any of the exercises that we will do will require anybody to touch anybody else. And the reason I do that is that it completely removes any ambiguity about any types of touching, even if it's between people who already know each other. It just removes that certainty. So you're not trying to think, well, what parts can I touch? There's no touching at all. So that's for my beginner classes. And then for more advanced classes, I have some limited touching allowed. And we clarify that at the start of the session through the boundary testing with everybody to make sure that everybody is comfortable with either touching of the hands or the lower arm or an arm or a shoulder. But we clarify that to ensure that everybody is comfortable with that. And then there's the third type, which is two-prov or group improv that I do with just basically my friends. And in those circumstances, there are just the usual boundaries, nothing around the private areas or sensitive areas. So there's that kind of gradation from no touching to limited with strangers touching to the usual boundaries. So taking that further, I recently went to see TJ and Dave, the great improv duo, at the Soho Theatre in London. And during the scene, Dave was standing up pretending to be on a phone taking a call, And immediately TJ jumped behind him, sat on a chair, and started nuzzling his face into Dave's butt. And it was very, very funny indeed. The purpose of doing that was, of course, that TJ was playing the lover of Dave out of earshot of the other person on the phone. And it was really, really funny. But clearly that is advanced with people who know each other extremely well, have performed for a very, very long time, and understand each other's boundaries very, very much. And that's probably the fourth level of touching. And it made me think, is that something that I would do or be comfortable with in a scene, either doing that to somebody or receiving that from somebody in a scene? And I'm not sure at this stage I'd be comfortable doing improv like that, because at this point in time I've not been doing improv for a very long time, or indeed for a long time with other people. So is that something ultimately that I could aspire to, nuzzling my face into someone's butt, or vice versa? Maybe, but not right now for me. But one of the things I have started to do in my own 2Prov at the third level is having a warm-up session where people hold hands, where we hold arms, we touch our knees, we touch each other's legs, we stroke each other's faces, we get physically close to each other, we hug each other. Just because I found if I haven't done that warm-up beforehand, which I know seems a bit odd, but if I haven't done that scene beforehand, even though we've agreed what the boundaries are, once you get into the scene, if you haven't done that physical contact beforehand, I still think it's a bit alien. I still feel it's alien when I get on stage. So I like to warm up beforehand, as I say, by hugging, holding hands, touching arms, touching someone's face, just so that I know, and they know, what it's like, and it's not alien when you get on stage to actually physically touch somebody. So then it begs the question for me, can not touching people limit your improv? And I've spoken to a few friends of mine about this as well, who have themselves different boundaries, different levels of touching interaction. And I think for quite a while I thought it was limiting. Not super limiting. Clearly there's a number of scenes and a number of different formats that you can do. But I did think that it would present itself as a bit of a ceiling, because I do think that touching can inform an audience about the relationship between characters. I think it can inform on a level of intimacy. Now, that can be a serious level of intimacy, or it can just be playfulness. It can be a sort of tap on the shoulder or a tap on the knee. But that's what I think touching does. It informs about the nature of the relationship between two characters. But is it a ceiling? Well, I don't think it is after thinking about it. And one of the things I want to start doing is exploring other ways to demonstrate intimacy between characters on stage. I was recently at the Dingbats Improv Retreat in Sussex, and I remember watching a scene with a friend of mine, Edward, and there were two things that he did that I thought, wow, I want to start doing that a bit more. And they evidenced intimacy. The first was he made eye contact, and he kept eye contact and smiling. And what it told the audience was he was listening, he was connecting with the other character. And then the second thing was that he responded to what the other character was saying with real passion. So the scene, I believe, was about being stuck in Tesco and not being able to find the appropriate hobnobs, but holding the gaze, listening intently as the character, and then reacting with real passion actually gave us that connection without any physical contact whatsoever. It gave us the connection between these two people, that they were special for each other, and that their evening was probably going to be ruined because they didn't get any hobnobs. But the point is that we, the audience, saw that connection. And it made me really think, actually, maybe there isn't a ceiling to not touching people in improv. Maybe there are ways around that. If you don't feel comfortable touching people, for whatever reason, there are other ways to form that connection and that intensity between the characters. I guess a caveat to that is that if you're not comfortable touching and you still want to have that connection, you still, I think, possibly need to have that kind of physical closeness. So this is where I've possibly talked about before around neutral distancing or avoiding neutral distancing. This is a distance between the two characters or any characters where it's not possible to tell the nature of their relationship. So they're neither too far away nor too close to ascertain what is the nature of their relationship. So I do think some form of physical closeness, being slightly close together, doesn't mean you have to hold the other person or be uncomfortably close to them, but something that intimates the nature of those characters' relationship. So that's something that I learned and something I'm going to try and take on myself. It was really quite inspiring to think there are other ways around intimacy other than just touching. And those things are maintaining eye contact, reacting with real passion, playing it to the top of your game, sometimes improvisers call it, but really reacting well, no matter how silly the object of that reaction is, but reacting really well and having some level of physical closeness to indicate the nature of the relationship. So thanks very much for listening to the Nano Film Improv podcast, and I'll catch you in the next one.